There's all kinds of stories about Obamacare. With us is Senator Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania to talk about that and much more. Good morning, Senator. Welcome back to the Morning News.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thanks for having me.
Hope you had a great Thanksgiving.
Very much so. How about you guys?
We did okay. We did all right. But Chris had to suffer through a conversation during his Thanksgiving out in Ohio.
I didn't bring it up. At some point, Obamacare came up in the conversation, and I have a number of relatives that still think Obamacare is going to be a great thing for the country.
You have a president apparently thinks that too, Pat, because he's coming out this afternoon and he's going to be talking at 2:30 about it, and he's going to have the usual suspects lined up behind him and the props. And what do you think about this whole thing right now? I mean, you've got to be hearing tons about that when you got home over the time you've been away.
Well, absolutely, since I've been home, but even before we got home during this state work period, we were getting buried with emails and phone calls from people who are discovering not only am I losing the coverage I was promised I could keep, but I can't get a new plan, or when they do go to get a new plan, it costs much more, or it costs much more. Oh, and by the way, the doctors that they've been used to going to aren't covered under this new plan. I mean, it's just a complete and unmitigated disaster.
One of the stories that came out about the revamped website yesterday was, a lot of people jumped back in there yesterday after they got it supposedly up and running in a much better way over the weekend. And they found out, though, that a lot of them, number one, there was a big glut, and of course, Jay Carney said yesterday, we expected that, and they were put into a waiting room. But then the other part that was a little bit more of a red flag was the fact that a lot of the people who thought they had signed up found out that they had not signed up.
Right.
And that information was not apparently copied where it was supposed to be copied in that whole website. I mean, the stories about this, I know the Democrats are out there over the weekend saying, well, it's the Republicans' fault now somehow. But by the same token...
I'm sure it's George Bush's fault.
Well, I don't think they've gone that far back yet, but give them a chance. They're flailing. But go ahead, your thoughts.
Well, look, I have personal experience. All members of Congress and our staffs are thrown off the plans that we've had, and we're forced onto the exchange starting January 1, which is just a few weeks away. So my wife was on the website just yesterday trying to figure out what we're going to do for our family, and it took her forever to be able to log on. And by the way, my wife is a very smart and capable and computer-savvy, competent person. Took her a long time to get on, but that was just to get them to take her personal information. And then the website refused to offer any alternative. It just wasn't functioning. She called up the helpline, and they said, oh, yeah, we know. It's a real problem. We're working on it. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So this is just continuing. Yes, the problem you're alluding to is another whole concern, right? People go to the website, they provide all their personal information, they think they've got a plan, but the data is never making it to the actual insurance company. So what's going to happen when that person shows up at the doctor's office or the hospital?
Right.
They think they're insured. They got a response eventually from this website, only to discover that maybe the insurer doesn't have the information. I'm afraid that we are just at the beginning of a whole series of disastrous discoveries. Nancy Pelosi had a point when she said, you got to pass the law to see what's in it. Well, they passed the law, and now we're finding out the consequences.
Well, and we have a number of cybersecurity experts that are still saying, I'm not going to go there because the security issues continue. You're giving all your personal information to this website, and people can access it.
Dr. Dave Kennedy was with us last week, the guy who, I guess, showed the committee the other week exactly how you can hack in, and he's a guy who tests these websites, and he said, frankly, you can't fix it while it's up and running. He said because the information that was not built into the website, you can't really add now. You have to kind of go back and make sure what you put in is what you're going to get out, essentially.
Yeah, unfortunately, I got to tell you, I don't see any reason that we ought to be confident that all of the security measures needed have been put in place. Nothing else has been done right.
Well, they've said even the most basic security measures that were supposed to be in are not in there, and that it's going to be rife for picking information. And they asked every one of the IT guys that were before the committee the other week. They said, "Would you go into this website right now?" No, was the blanket answer. Do you think other people should go into it now? No, was the blanket answer. Is it ready for being up and running right now? No, was the blanket answer in terms of security. Yeah,
it's true, and it's appalling. It's just as I say, it's an unmitigated disaster.
So what are we to do? I mean, we sit here and kind of talk about it, but what are we to do at this particular point? Is this just a train wreck you have to let finish out? And I don't mean to use train wrecks this morning. It's a kind of a sensitive morning for that. But point being, is it a disaster you just have to let fall down and then As I said to you last time, you're going to have to come up with a plan, or is it just a matter of can Republicans, and not even Republicans anymore, can citizens of goodwill come out here and do something about this in the short term or even in the long term?
Well, that's the great dilemma, right? What can be done? Everything you try to do has unintended consequences. So it's hard to, first of all, let's accept the premise. This can't be fixed, right? You can't tweak this to a successful program because it's built on completely flawed premises.
It's like putting the dam back together by putting gum over the holes that's sprouting holes, and every time you put the gum over one hole, another one sprouts. So yeah,
it's totally not going to work. So the question in my mind is sort of two tracks at the same time. One, are there some rifle shot little things we can do that will at least alleviate some of the huge problems? I think of the woman that sent me a letter who has multiple sclerosis, has for years, had an insurance plan that worked for her and covered what she needed, and she's been informed that she's losing that plan. And the two options available to her under Obamacare, one covers her medicines, the other covers her doctors, and neither one covers both. Is there something we can do for people who find themselves in those kinds of terrible circumstances? I think we should be open to that. Mm-hmm. But meanwhile, the big, medium-term goal has to be to corral the public support to get this thing completely repealed. And I don't rule out the possibility that after the 2014 elections, we might not have a broad enough consensus that we could override the president's veto and get this thing repealed, because it is just such a disaster, and people are increasingly seeing it as such.
Senator, I think one of the things that's happening right now, too, is you hear people saying, and I know you've heard this probably ad nauseum, but make this one more time, are Republicans too comfortable in the club called the Senate right now? A lot of people have that perception. You have to work inside that kind of atmosphere every single day. What are Republicans to do? I saw the other day Mitch McConnell come out and said you have to be aware of certain kinds of conservatives out there, and referred to a Tea Party group that's funding a guy running against him in Kentucky. So there's a battle going on for principles, and I think a lot of people are fed up, and yet they're not quite sure where to go, and so they go back to the Constitution, but then it gets very narrowly defined. How do we deal in politics today with that kind of thought?
I think part of the challenge we face as a party and the conservative movement is establishing realistic expectations when our party controls only one of the three parts of the elected government. Mm-hmm. We control the House of Representatives. We do not control the Senate, and we do not control the White House. And so one of the things I think we haven't done a great job of is calibrating expectations. What is it that we can accomplish with this configuration of government, which, by the way, the last time we had this exact configuration where the Democrats controlled the White House, the Senate, and Republicans had the House was 1859. So it's been a long time. Yeah. Now, of course, we've had divided government many times. So we should be able to figure this out. But I think it was a case of unrealistic expectations and failure to calibrate expectations that led us to believe that we could completely defund Obamacare if we just threatened to shut down the government otherwise. There's nobody that's more opposed to Obamacare than I am. But it never occurred to me that the president was going to sign off on my plan to get rid of Obamacare. We're going to have to win this in a broader context. We're going to have to win elections in 2014. And then we can make more progress towards the sweeping goals that we have.
So it'll ultimately be the will of the people that's going to put this thing back into whatever balance you'd like it to be.
There's no substitute for winning elections.
Yeah.
Be as objective as you can. With this debacle of a rollout dealing with Obamacare here, do you think Republicans can win the Senate back next year?
We've got 11 months to go before the election. So point number one is things will change. We just don't know exactly how they will change. But I do have to say, second midterm elections usually go badly for the party in the White House. And Obamacare is the signature achievement of the Democrats. Every Democrat incumbent senator completely owns this, having voted for it many, many times, voted against doing anything to change it many times. I think it's going to be a huge problem. I do think we have at least a 50-50 chance that Republicans will be in the majority after the 2014 election.
Pat, it seems like one thing here that take the controlling 1/3 away, that a lot of people are saying, okay, Democrats are flailing right now. Obama's coattails are getting short. A lot of them are distancing themselves already. And yet at the same time, are Republicans doing a good enough job offering good, solid alternatives that Americans can understand that are simple, that can be talked about on Main Street, as opposed to this accumulation of complexities that never ever are very open. Your thoughts?
It's a great point on healthcare. I assume you're referring to. And
on anything. I mean, I think people want to be talked to straight.
Well, sure. I think in a lot of areas we do have a very simple message. We're for more domestic energy. We're for lower taxes, not higher taxes. We think the government spends too much, want to spend less. We think our deficits have been too big. We want to borrow less. Those are simple, straightforward messages the American people agree with us overwhelmingly on. With health care, the problem is we've got the reforms. We know exactly the modest but specific things that we want to do to make health care more affordable, more accessible, and mostly more responsive to consumers, so that individuals and families get the plans that they want, they get the treatment that they want when they want it. We've got those reforms, but we've never packaged that in a pretty box and put a nice bow on it, so that there's a very simple, catchy phrase like Obamacare for the left. Most people that would claim to be fans of it probably can't tell you much about what's in it, but they know the name, and they've decided they like it, and that's good marketing. So we've got the reforms that would create more competition, would lower costs, would bring out some of the expenses in the system, would, as I say, make it more responsive to families and patients and consumers. But I think you're right that we haven't packaged it well, and that is something that we really need to do.
And I think if you had, the numbers would be markedly different, even with a press that's against you.
But I will say that I think we're aware of this, and we're working on it, and we will over time. And because now, of course, Republicans don't have like our version of Obamacare. We don't want to take over 1/6 of the economy. We want people to be free to make decisions that work for them.
Yeah, the scariest word in Washington to us out here is comprehensive. You talk about immigration, you talk about this, it's become the biggest swear word.
Yeah.
Hey, very quickly, we're just under a minute. What about Iran? The president made this agreement. John Kerry made the agreement. I've heard a lot of people on left and right really talking about it. Your final thoughts here, 45 seconds.
I'm just very, very concerned. What we're doing is easing off on the sanctions, giving the Iranian regime access to billions of dollars, which makes their life more comfortable and more manageable, all the while they retain the capability to develop nuclear fuel, which can be used in nuclear weapons. I'm very, very concerned. Very, very hard to return tough sanctions after the West has eased up on them, and leaving in place the capability to develop this nuclear weapons systems, I think is very, very dangerous.
And puts us in a very, very weak situation right now, and we have to trust but verify, or distrust but verify. We'll find out how that works. Senator, always a pleasure having you aboard. We'll look forward to talking to you next month, and that means Merry Christmas to you.
Hey, Merry Christmas to you guys. Thanks very much for having me.
Take care, and have a great time with your family as well. Thank you. Senator Pat Toomey with us here on the Morning News. WSBA.